What's up, ADHD? Nope, I did that. No, I didn't. What's up, ADHD rewired ear buddies? We are 2 days away from kicking off the 33rd season of ADHD rewired's coaching and accountability groups. Did I mention this is an award-winning program? I'm recording this right now on Friday, July 7th. I'm not sure if we still have spots left in our summer sessions. I think that we do. I know we do as of this recording, but check the website to see if you can still join. Also, if you're catching this early enough on Tuesday, July 11th, we're going to be doing an open house right after the live Q&A this Tuesday to answer your questions and get you registered. We'll even co-work with you while you do pre-registration stuff if you haven't started that yet.
I was uncertain about group coaching. I just hadn't ever done that. And I'm amazed at the value of group work. I really underestimated, or I really am just so pleasantly surprised with the impact that the group work has had on me to add a sense of community to my life, that sense of accountability that comes with a group that really is benevolent. And that's just so lovely and something that's just been so hard to find.
All right, more at the break. We'll go to coachingrewired.com to learn more. Now, on the show. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. We are here for our live monthly Q&A. We are recording this in the month of June. If you are hearing this on your podcast feed, I hope you are now enjoying a nice July. All right, let me introduce our panel of panelists. In my left corner, first time joining us on the panel here is Dana Cruz. She a recent graduate of our coaching and accountability groups. She's also a coach, trained therapist, globetrotter and many interests around the world. Dana, welcome to the Q&A.
Thank you, Eric. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. And we have Coach Kristen Martz. How you doing, Kristen?
Doing all right. How are you?
Doing great. And to my right, we have Laura. How you doing, Laura?
Feeling bright-eyed and bushy-tailed today.
That is awesome. And you got as you told me, you got your stuff cleaned up behind you.
I did. It took longer than I want to admit. So,
and we got Brian Entler, one of our ADHD Rewired coaches and cyclist extraordinaire.
Good morning. Thank you, Eric.
Good to see you. And in the top of my screen, we got Lisa Ciesler, our resident Dr. Seuss character, and my executive assistant, who helps out with so many things that my brain doesn't do well. Hey, Lisa, how you doing?
Hi, everyone. Doing great. It's Tuesday, right? Tuesday. Woo!
It is Tuesday. And the star of the moment, we have Ryan, who is going to be asking the first question. So, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is, I and my son have both recently been diagnosed in the last couple of years, myself at the end of last year, him in 2020 because of him. As is normally the case, it seems like for us adults. And I don't feel great about either one of our prescribers' knowledge of ADHD, meds, stimulants, whatever the other options are, but stimulants obviously being the main ones, and we're both on them. And we're just kind of wondering, what we can do to find either the right people to prescribe, or maybe helping to educate our prescribers or know what to look for versus how are you feeling? What's been going on? It's usually the same questions we always get. And it's like, well, I feel a little more productive, but I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know what I don't know. Reading as much as I can, but I just don't know how to help them other than maybe throw some book titles at them or something like that and hope they read them.
There is, if you go to the CHADD website, CHADD.org, under it's connected with the National Resource Center on ADHD, and they have a bunch of what they're called what we know tip sheets that I think have some things like that that you can actually hand to your prescriber. Let's see what Kristen has to say.
All right. So first of all, I'm an LCSW and do work with, and have in the past worked with psychiatrists for common clients. However, I'm also ADHD as well as my son, and I have a brilliant general practitioner who knows how much I love information and has schooled me. I cannot repeat it back except to say that, there are different classes of the meds. So there's like the Vyvanse, and I think it goes with the Adderall, and the Focalin goes with the Ritalin, something like that. And those two different things work on different parts of the brain doing different things. My son, he takes Adderall, but I take Ritalin. I actually cheated one time and tried the Adderall. It didn't do anything for me. So there is very much that knowledge to understand. Because of that, it is because the doctor knows us so well and he can see the different aspects of what our ADHD, how it presents. So I would suggest looking up the executive functioning components and starting to understand where it is you're having greatest deficits, where it's really impacting you. And when he says, how you feeling, go into that, because it could be that they understand that. They just aren't skilled at asking the questions, the assessing questions yet. And again, if you can find someone who is more adept at that, that's certainly another route to go. But I think that would be my first step, is look up what all the categorical parts of, I don't know if I'm using the right words, of what our executive functioning does, and see where you're having the most issues and give that information, because it might be completely different from your son's. And so share those too for him.
Okay. Yeah. We're actually both similar to you. He's on Adderall, I'm on Ritalin, and I seem to do pretty well, but I've also managed my ADHD without medication for so long, and he hasn't. So he's struggling a ton on Adderall with getting stuff done. So I'm kind of like, what can we do for this kid? We're pulling our hairs out and trying to figure out what to do to help him. And this might help. Maybe he's not on the right meds. I don't know.
Dana?
Brian, can I ask how old your son is?
He is 17.
Okay. Have you guys talked about core values? Have you talked about long-term or short-term goals together? Like, what is his motivation? Where does it stem from? Is he interested in even knowing about ADHD or knowing about himself? Or do you guys ask questions to each other?
We do all those things for sure. He's a teenager, so he's a teenager. He's most
time is the cure.
Yeah, he's most interested in being a teenager and doing the drama that comes with that. So no, we literally just had a conversation with him last week asking about his goals in life and what he wants to do, and he has no clue. He loves to write. He's super creative. He loves animals and the environment. Like, he has a lot of interests, but he has no goals. So we're just like trying to tie those goals and interests together for him, and to help maybe say, hey, here's some ideas of what you might be able to do. Maybe you should research it, or something like that. Or we give him an ADHD book and he reads a chapter and then puts it down and never looks at it again. So tried a lot of things for sure. And we're definitely trying to poke and prod, but it's not been super successful. But time is not on our side since he graduates next year. He's going to go into his senior year next year. So we don't have a lot of time to sit here and, think about it. It's time for action, I guess.
Keep in mind too that some of us are in our 40s and we're still figuring this out.
True.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, what is your idea of success for him?
For me, what I want to see is for him to have some sort of motivation in his life to go in a direction. I've told him I've changed my thoughts on my life and career so many times. We've moved several times. I've gone to different companies, so I'm not saying that he needs to map out his next 50 years. What I do want to see is that he has a direction, whether it's college, community college, trade school. I don't care. I told him, even if you want to go work at a bike shop, your whole life, I don't care. Like, money is not the issue here. It's the direction. I want to see what you're interested in doing and where you want to go.
It sounds like you're asking all the right questions and you're doing all the right things, and you're allowing him to be interest and strengths driven, and from your knowledge of ADHD. And that sounds like that's what you're doing. So it's great that you're allowing that conversation to happen. It's great that you know what will be helpful. And it sounds like that's what you're doing.
Okay.
I think that's great. And circling back to something Kristen said, when our doctors ask us, when our psychiatrist asks us how we've been doing, they are asking as a reference point since the last time we saw them. How we tend to answer is like how we've been doing in the last 24 hours, right? So especially if you're trying to get meds, adjust meds, I think it's really helpful to try to take some, just basic data. You don't need to overcomplicate it, but something that you just maybe are recording something every couple of days, right? About how you're doing. So you can come in with some data and say, well, I've had some ups and downs over the last several weeks versus I don't know, like the last 2 days was good. I think I'm doing great. I think, and the other thing, Ryan, that, and as a dad who also has a neurodivergent kiddo, I think the things that tend to worry me the most are the things that I see my son doing that remind me of myself, right? So, and I think that what's so important is we got to help our kids really know that we believe that even if they don't make the best choice, that they're going to learn from it and they're going to get back up and they're going to keep moving forward, right? So it's, I think that's such an important thing that we instill in our kids. Look, we were kids once too. We screwed up so many times, and we're doing all right. So I think it's just if we can really instill that we trust in our kids that they're going to make mistakes and they're going to have the skills to learn from it.
Yep. Thank you very much.
You bet. Kristen, you have one final thought, and let's go to the next question.
One final thought, because he said throw book titles at them. Throw podcast titles at them. Doctors are very, very busy. And so sometimes just a trip down the road to get to their office may be the time they have to listen to some of this. So, could start with us. But, and seriously, I have given this podcast to my doctor too. And they found it important, especially certain episodes that speak to what you're trying to get them to know about.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Let's go to another question here. All right. We got Gerald. Gerald, what's your question?
All right. So I think for most of us, we have trouble managing expectations, especially if they're coming from those who are neurotypical and they are not aware of our needs. Like sometimes we need a break. So I just like some perspective on how we can communicate needs without needing to go into a lecture about our condition. I'm quite open to ideas on this.
Sure. I think one of the simplest phrases we can use in conversations about this without having to even get into having ADHD is, I work best when. And that's it. Like, they really don't need much more beyond that. I work best when. I work best when due date's broken down. I do best when I can check in with someone. I do best when if I have to do some writing, I can be in a quiet room. I do best when, so really kind of think about that because the idea is as if you are working for an organization, ADHD or not, you got to do the job. So what accommodations do you need in order to help yourself do the best job that you can do? Because, businesses are in business to make money and do business. So how can those accommodations, even if you don't call it something you need for ADHD, how can your work environment best support you to help support the business?
So in the examples, especially those who are new to ADHD, you might not know what works best for you. Where do we go from that? I'm fairly aware of what my limitations are, but I get asked, okay, so what do you need to make this happen? And I'm just stumped because, okay, I know what works for situation A, B, but this is situation G. I have no idea what works for this one.
Everything we do in a coaching realm is about promoting experimentation, right? It's kind of starting with a hypothesis of all right, here's this challenge I'm having. I think this is going to be something that might help. Then we try it and we try not to be overly attached to the outcome. It's really about focusing on the process and just learning from it. And so if you're, talking with colleagues and say, I'm trying a little bit of a different approach to this project, or and I wrote an article that suggested this strategy. I'm going to give it a try, right? So it's really just about being open to that idea of experimentation for the purpose of trying to figure out the way you work best. Laura?
I think something to keep in mind when coming into this situation is, regardless of whether or not someone is neurotypical or neurodiverse, many people are fixers. It's a knee-jerk reaction. And so it can be really helpful to express our needs up front by being direct and saying I'm not looking for that type of suggestion before you even jump into expressing what you're trying to express, because we all have different degrees of advice monsters in our heads. And frequently, we don't think about them being there until someone has pointed out that that's happening. So asking for what you need in that way, I think, can be incredibly useful.
That's great.
Thank you, Laura. Although what I meant was more on the lines of we've expressed our needs. Like, I don't think I could finish this in this time frame, and then we start to get into the weeds as to what is going to make me, not meet this time frame. And the suggestions that come back might not necessarily might not be helpful in any way, and that can be very difficult sometimes to explain that. How do I refute the suggestion gently?
Thanks for the idea. Mike, you can literally say, thanks for the idea. I'll think about that.
Okay.
Just because part of what and this is something that I think I'm also learning to do more of too, is when asking for feedback, like being kind of transparent, say, like, I'm asking for feedback doesn't mean I'm going to follow that feedback, but I'm interested in hearing ideas.
Okay, I think I see what's going on here. When I put the suggestion in quotation marks, I actually meant unsolicited feedback.
Yeah, no one likes that.
Yeah.
Anyone else have thoughts on that? Brian, go ahead.
I'm thinking.
You're
This is my pensive face. Are we specific? I want to clarify. We've been talking specifically about work, but is this limited to work situations, or is it other situations too, like interpersonal?
It's interpersonal, pretty much universal. It can be friends, family, work, sometimes even a random stranger.
Okay. Have you ever successfully asked for advice like this in the past, and then how did that work?
How
like when you ask for something, I need to do this way, and then somebody gave you an idea. Can you think of any time that there was a successful interaction like that in the past that was effective for you, where you got information, or you got information that you didn't want to use, but you felt like it went well enough that the other person didn't feel slighted? Do you have any experience with that?
Okay, so the situation when I was moving house, there was an issue on how would I bring my pet cat along. So we were discussing for ideas, and one of the ideas was potentially giving him up for adoption. But it was quite a sudden suggestion, and it was given in something like 2 days notice, which is not a lot of time to think about saying goodbye to a family member. So I kind of like said that, yeah, I need to think about it, and managed to negotiate about 2 weeks time frame. But then somebody actually showed up to want to adopt, and that was well below the 2 weeks. And the family member who suggested the adoption was telling the adopting person that foster my cat for a few days, and then we'll see after that. But when I spoke with that person who was offering to adopt, they were under the impression that they were it's not just foster for a few days, but it was like goodbye right there and then. So it started from a suggestion of adopting, and then it kind of spiraled out into a case of, okay, I've offered you a solution, you don't want to take it, and then you figure it out. But
it sounds like an issue of boundaries, like a boundary violation.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just probably why
a boundary violation.
So to me, that's like kind of a separate issue and a separate conversation. If I have a conversation with someone and we make an agreement and then they do something that is different than the agreement, now we are talking about boundaries. We're not talking about the issue itself, right? Because that's a trust violation. Mm-hmm. So,
And that's a boundary issue, but I mean, many ADHD people struggle with boundary issues. A reason we tend to be people pleasers, we tend to not be comfortable asserting ourselves and saying no. And I'm speaking from my own experience. Not everyone experiences that. So that might, boundary issues is separate, but is something that is very common. Also, ADHD adjacent in many cases. So I don't think they're completely unrelated, but I'm curious why you thought when I suggested you come up with a successful example, why is this a successful example of getting advice?
Oh, okay. But having a moment to think it over, I was thinking of it as a process that you can't manage boundaries. First, you set the expectation, which is the boundary. And then after that, when the boundary is not met, then we have the second part, which is a bit more on the reactive side where, all right, that didn't work. How do we address it? Okay. So what happens before and what happens after?
Have you ever done any, have you read any books specifically on boundaries? Because that might be a helpful place for you to look at how do we communicate
Yeah.
things around boundaries? Because it's tough for a lot of us.
Not really. I wouldn't mind a good suggestion or two.
I know what, I think Henry Cloud, I think, writes a lot about boundaries. And of course, all those books I've read on boundaries, none of the titles are coming to my mind right now. So we'll maybe throw some in the chat if we have others, and we can then relay them on the podcast if they come in here quickly and we see them. Do any of you have boundary book suggestions? Laura?
I really like Set Boundaries, Find Peace. I would jump into that. She is very explicit. It is not soft around the edges. It is, I am being direct with you. Please respect my wishes. And I think that that's really powerful.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Thank you, Drell, for your question.
Thank you.
Let's go to one more question before we take a break. Kathy, let's get you unmuted here. And what is your question?
Hi. My 11-year-old son is just staying glued to screens all the time. And what'll happen is he'll get into his screens and then, he won't eat good. He'll just, it's just like he gets sucked in or something. And then I end up going on my computer and getting sucked in because both of us have ADHD. We have different types. I think he's more hyperactive and I'm more of the inattentive type. So I just got to find a way to get him off the screens.
So I 1,001% relate to this issue. I have an 11-year-old who is constantly on his screen, and it kind of drives me crazy. So, I guess one is starting with some of the parameters. When do you not specifically want him on the screen? For my son, and he violates this rule all the time. He seems to forget every single day that he's not supposed to be on a screen until he has all his stuff done in the morning. There's also the idea that there's not all screen time is created equally. Right. So there's the random, minute by minute, videos that they scroll on. That's awful for the ADHD brain. It's super bad for our brain. Even as adults too. I get sucked into it too. And it's frustrating because I'm okay, I need to stop. And it's oh, but just one more. Oh, just one more. So if as an adult, if we're struggling with that, we have to just really empathize with, man, for a kid, that has to be so hard. So if you can focus on creative types of screen time, so he's making something, he's doing something where it's not just consuming. So I would encourage sort of a discussion around that and using the actual tools for screen time limits that are on the screens, because you can have those parental controls. In a lot of ways, there's been a few times over the last, I don't know, year or so where my son lost screen time because of behavior. And I have to tell you, he was a joy during the time that he was not on his screens. I don't know about if your school gives your kiddo an iPad. Mine has had one since kindergarten, and it's awful. I don't think that kids that young should be on these kinds of screens. I think it is not good for their developing brains. And it's a real thing. And we got to be mindful of our own screen behavior too. And I think as a parent who obviously also has ADHD, I get frustrated with my son because I see the same behavior in myself, right? And it's that tends to be the stuff that frustrates us the most. We're oh no, don't do this because we're doing it and we don't like that we're doing it. So we don't want that for our kids either. The other thing is try to join them in what they're doing. There's also that opportunity to have it become a social piece because for better or worse, that is how kids are socializing, is through their screens. Right. So there's, yeah, well, that's, if he's talking to friends, I think that's great. I don't think that's a problematic thing. If he's having, relatively age appropriate behaviors, if he's engaging well and he's playing games with friends, that's kind of how kids are playing these days. He
plays video games that way. And I know most of the kids that he does that with, but what he does is when he's not on the phone with them, that's when he switches and he goes to the random videos, one right after the other. So he'll be with his friends and engaged. And then all of a sudden he'll just spend, hours watching video after video. Yeah. And then sometimes it's I'm what are you watching? And I try to go over there. And then by that time he's back on with a friend or something. So it's
there's a lot there. There's a lot to kind of pull apart there. Dana, go ahead.
Yeah, this is, like you said, Eric, a really complicated situation and very difficult to deal with, working with parents and children and screens. Modeling that behavior, like Eric said, is really important. Are you giving yourself limitations And are you talking about that openly with your son? Like, hey, I also have difficulty taking myself away. Like, what kind of limitations should I maybe set for myself? And then having a conversation with him about it and saying, how long do you think is a good time to be on a screen per day? Like, I have a stepdaughter who's turning 9 this week, and our limitation is 2 hours per day, and she gets to set those timers and those limitations within that 2 hours herself, because I want her to learn that independence and that understanding time and that self-control aspect of it too. So it's like about having that conversation, being open, being curious. And maybe that isn't just about downtime. Maybe it is. Maybe it's about consuming, like Eric said, the difference between consuming or learning something, learning a skill or interacting with friends. So asking him the specific questions about, what do you get from this? What's working for you? How are you understanding that? Does it feel difficult to step away from it? How can we work together to create those kind of boundaries or limitations and experiment?
Thank you.
Kristen?
I think this is for everyone out there with a pattern of behavior that they want to change. When you're going to take that activity away, all of us need to find something to replace it with.
Yeah.
And the way our kids are growing up and they're on the screens all the time, especially now that it's only, 3 years past pandemic, I imagine that your son was second or third grade maybe, and got really accustomed to that because that's the way they socialize. So there may be some additional kind of backtrack teaching you might have to employ with him to, well, what can he do? What are some activities he can do that doesn't involve a screen? Because that may be a little foreign to him, having that pandemic got in the way of some of that development stuff.
Right.
Laura?
On the front of friends and socializing, it's okay to put limits on socializing. I'm a Zennial, and so I remember the world before the internet, and we talked to people on the phone, and I was allowed to be on the phone for like an hour, maybe 2 on a lucky night, and then I spent time with my family and did homework and read books. Obviously, things are different now, but I think it's okay to put that limitation in place. Kiddos don't need to be in contact with their friends 24/7. It's not going to stunt their growth if they have a little limitation on that front.
Yeah, the limitations, as much as our kids in the moment might hate it, is also really regulating for them, right? Dana, final thought, and then we're going to take a quick break.
Yes. One more thing is, wow, I just had it and now I lost it. Wait. My stepdaughter, what she says is, I'm bored. And I have a reaction to that. My emotional reaction is, I have to take care of this. I have to entertain her. But then I think, wait, it's good to be bored because then you get creative.
That's right.
Right. So it's like, what's your relationship or reaction to him not being on the screen? And what does that feel like to you? And kind of, connect to that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for your question, Kathy. All right. We're going to take a real quick break here for the podcast. And when we come back, we have more of your questions. So we will be right back. Hey there, ADHD Rewired listeners. We are just 2 days away from kicking off the 33rd season of coaching and accountability groups. Go to coachingrewired.com to learn more. Is overwhelm your default mode on most days? Have you read, listened to, or watched all of the things, but you're still feeling stuck and aren't sure what to do next? Are you sick of trying harder and want to try something different? If you want to learn how to better manage your time, take charge of your calendar, set healthier boundaries, create a to-do list that prioritizes your goals and your self-care, all while having a supportive community of like-brained adults with ADHD cheering you on, then don't wait. Come on over to coachingrewired.com. Well, our summer season is kicking off in hours, 48, 72 hours from right now. Go on over to the website. We may still have a couple spots open. Go to coachingrewired.com. And if you're listening to this way after the date that it came out, still go to coachingrewired.com to see where we're at with registration. After 10 weeks, the one thing that I can promise you is you will still have ADHD. But the difference, once the 10 weeks are over, is that you will be equipped with new, shiny tools and strategies to help you keep moving forward with your wildly important goals. And you'll have a community of wonderful, neurodiverse people to help you back up when you stumble and fall. Because ADHD management goes beyond just the tools. So much of it is about the people who are there for you to help you along the way. We can't wait to get started with you. Go to coachingrewired.com. It's time to do something different. Try ADHD Rewired's coaching and accountability groups. We look forward to growing with you. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back. I wanted to address the sensory question. Jenna asked, it was, do any of you have sensory issues? Jenna says, when it comes to clothing and scents, is this an ADHD specific thing or could there be something else going on? Well, Jenna, that's an interesting and pretty timely question at the moment. So for years, I've always thought that sensory issues were like the part of ADHD that why isn't anybody talking about? And recently I've been kind of thinking that maybe it's not an ADHD thing, potentially. Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. So I'll tell you personally, I have a whole list of sensory issues, from auditory processing issues to like the way certain like the tactile sensations, like the way certain things feel. There's certain like sensory sensations that I really love and seek, and there are others that like almost like my bones hurt. Like, you know, those like rubber bracelets, like the Livestrong style bracelet. Those, like, I can't stand those. Although I recently put a key on one of them, and because I had a little extra weight, I didn't mind it, which is also kind of weird. So I don't know. Like, let's ask the panel. What are your sensory issues?
I'll go. Yeah. My mom, when I was a toddler learning to eat foods and went to Big People Food, she used the separated plate, you know, those separated bowl things. And then when I moved and graduated to the regular plate, I would freak out. I'm better about it now, but I'm a very picky eater. I have a lot of oral sensory issues. However, I couldn't have the juice go into other foods, things like that. My poor mom thought it was her fault. She thought it had to do with that divided bowl. No, we've learned that it's this instead. There are times that I'm walking places and I see something and I have to touch it. And it's like, it's every bit of restraint to not touch it because it might be on someone's body, you know? So there are several more, but I'll let everybody join in.
Dana?
Oh, yeah. Sensory issues? Definitely. Certain smells. Ooh, certain like feelings like dirty, cold dishwasher. Like certain things make me nauseous. Oh, yeah. Certain style of touches like tickling. Yeah, don't like that. Things, certain sounds, certain light.
Oh, fluorescent lights are the worst. Mm-hmm. The buzzing or the flickering.
Oh, I can't stand that. Yeah. For years, I had to have like a lamp and turn off my overhead light, you know, in the office. Yeah. I think, you know, I encourage clients to make a sensory inventory. What do you like? What do you not like? Hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, all, you know, all of the senses. Understand yourself and what it is that you are really aversion and go towards, both, or neutral too. That's important also.
Laura, how about you?
So I definitely have some auditory processing issues. My most severe one is a hand running on fabric, like rubbing. If you're wiping off a tablecloth, I have to cover my ears. I can't deal with it. It took my mom a really long time to figure it out, and now she's very sensitive to it, and that's been amazing. And similarly, hands rubbing together is really, really awful for my ears. And then
what if they're your hands?
I don't like it.
Even if it's your, okay. That's interesting because certain
awful
sounds that like, I don't mind if I'm creating the sound, but if somebody else is creating the sound, like sweeping on concrete, like even just saying that makes my bones hurt.
I do think there's also a bit of a link. ADHD and chronic pain are frequently correlated, and sensory stuff can really exacerbate inflammation, which exacerbates chronic pain. So there's a fun link there as well.
My son told me the other day that he can't tolerate like wet peanut butter because we had like a dish, and he was like, just as long as you don't make me clean it, like I'll put it in the sink, but please not have to clean it. Like I can't like and I'm like, I totally get it because I totally understand what you're talking about. It is this weird, thick, slimy sensation and it's nasty. Brian, do you have sensory issues?
Yeah, I think so. Like people talking in the background, I cannot function cognitively when there's another conversation going like in that process. And you might remember, Eric, we were talking last time you suggested I was reviewing replays of coaching sessions. And you said, oh, did you try the speed up tool where you speed up the playback to 1.5? And I'm like, can't do it. If I'm trying to understand what is being said, like speeding it up to 2 speed, like gives me anxiety. Like I can't even handle it. So yeah, like background noise, like I do great with background noise, like music or binaural beats. But like if there's words, same with I have a lot of sleep issues and people have tried those sleep stories. Oh, no way. If people are talking and I'm like, it's supposed to be a boring story, but I'm like, well, then what happened? Like what's at the bottom of that staircase? Like I need to know. Like, it actually makes it harder to sleep.
That's so interesting what you said about the speeding up. And if you need to hear it and understand it and process it, it has to be the regular speed. For me, to grab my attention and keep me engaged, I do have to speed it up. 2 point might be a little high, but I do go anywhere between 1.5 and 1.75, somewhere in there. Otherwise, I don't even, it doesn't even register. It goes like in and out the ear tunnel. That's that difference in presentation for ADHD, I think.
Well, I did do it. I could use the speed up feature effectively to get to the point where I wanted to be. Like, oh, I want to go on to this one thing, but I don't know where in this hour-long recording it is. I'll speed up and let it just go play, the really fast voice in the background. But when I hear the word or the thing I want, then I turn it off and I slow down because I just know if I try to plow through it, it'll freak me out.
Yeah, I think there's whether there is an overlap, and we. And this is something that I'm actually exploring myself personally is, may I actually be somewhere on that autism spectrum? The research has shown for a while now that there's people with ADHD rate very highly on autistic traits, not necessarily a full, blown diagnosis of autism. It's a fun question. All right. Do we have another question? All right. So Lorraine's question was, do y'all have any advice or suggestions, such as tools for keeping on top of writing as a master's student? Okay, I just got like knots in my stomach because I just remembered like the writing when being in grad school. I was like, oh God, I don't. Oh, so I'm not a slow writer, and I actually do enjoy writing most of the time. What I struggle with tends to revolve around getting started on assignments and working consistently. How do you not write entire papers the night before they're due? Wait, there's another approach to writing papers? Huh. Okay, no, seriously. So I would love to ask my panelists here what they did.
So I do not have a master's degree. However, I had to write a lot for an honors college within my undergrad degree. And the 2 things that got me to write were 2 books. One of them is called How to Write a Lot, and the other one is called The War of Art. How to Write a Lot actually kicked my ass into gear, which was astounding. And I was consistent, and it was very surprising. And obviously, I have ADHD, and after a while, the novelty of this wore off a little bit, but I still come back to it. And I think that is really what proves value in something is if we return to it. Regarding The War of Art, it is one of the very best books I've ever read about encountering resistance. I will give a little caveat here. The author does mention that he thinks ADHD isn't real. So what I do is I've actually literally torn out those 2 pages from the book because the rest of the book is gold. And then you've just got that little bit of shit in there.
That's funny you say that because I was like, I listened to that book and I remember not liking it. Dana?
Yes. So I had a lot of issues writing in my undergrad and graduate degrees. And I'm a verbal processor. So sometimes I just need that start to talk out loud with someone just to kind of get my thoughts out. Maybe they're writing it down, maybe I'm writing it down, but just to get started. And then sometimes also breaking things up, like kind of outlining things and then outlining it even further, detailing it in a way that's kind of chunking or tiny steps forward. I also have used like a large chunk of time, not just the night before, but like I'll dedicate, 10 hours to this one particular topic and allow for that, and then allow for rest and allow for recoup too. And it's not the night before, it's a week before or 2 weeks before, or even a month before. So kind of scheduling time in as I go to have these big chunks, because I like to write in big chunks and I think in big chunks too. So, but verbally processing was definitely my biggest tool for writing.
Awesome. Brian?
I have not been a master's student or a graduate student, but I have had to do like ongoing projects. I just want to extrapolate from some, maybe a little off topic, but I am a big fan of having a journaling practice in general, just for my own well-being and for keeping on track with my goals and whatnot. And I fall on and off with that, but I find that having a regular practice where start by writing anything, not necessarily about your academic topic, because that has a lot of baggage and a lot of resistance associated with it. But just getting the juices flowing and saying, good morning, Lorraine, and today I'm feeling this way, and just getting your thoughts down on paper can maybe help you get some activation energy and kind of take some of the painfulness out of sitting down to write for the academic reasons, and desensitizing that. And you might also use the journaling practice as a way to process that resistance. Like, I'm feeling really resistant, I'm feeling upset because I feel behind in my writing, and just that can maybe help get you over that hump. So in general, a journaling practice is great, but I think it could be applied in this situation to help you get over that activation hump.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's something that I've done too with journaling, where I'm literally like, I don't know what to write. I'm supposed to be writing something, and my brain is telling me nothing. And I just keep like writing stuff like that until just doing that kind of unlocks some stuff. A couple other quick.
I want to second that too.
Okay.
What Brian said, so that's why I interjected, because it didn't want you to go away from it. Because of that idea of our body taking on the habit. Sometimes you drive somewhere and you get in a daydream and you go on autopilot and you go to your office, and that's not anywhere you were. So it will help do that. And I love that suggestion.
Awesome. Having your due date and your done date be different dates is also very helpful. We just have to assume like the technology gods are going to like just be making fun of us when we have something like a big paper to do. The printer isn't working, or the internet goes out, or who knows? But I think if we give ourselves that extra time and really understand that, like, I really do need to be done like 5 days before it's actually due, and really like try to really stick to that. And if that's hard, leverage accountability. Right? I think that's another big piece for big papers. And maybe it's accountability for writing 500 or 1,000 words a day, depending on like whatever sort of how much you need to write to be on track to hit your goals. Voice texting is also a really, really helpful thing, especially if you have that tendency to keep hitting delete and edit while you write. I used to do that all the time, and it was just torture. So I get it. Like the writing piece can be so hard. Maybe try using ChatGPT. All right, let's go to another question.
We have a question from Nikki that says, regarding the emotional regulation piece, how do you conceptualize where ADHD ends and the other struggles such as bipolar or borderline or other mood disorders begin?
That's a good, tough question. I feel like that could be a whole episode. May
I ask a clarifying question? Is this about identifying these things in yourself, or when you observe them in other people? Or both?
We'll wait to see if Nikki responds there. Okay, both. So both. I think that when we're looking at diagnostic pictures are helpful as a starting point. But I think when we look at functional impairment, like what's the actual issue that is occurring, and then addressing that particular issue. So is it the skill of emotional regulation? I mean, that's part of ADHD. That's part of bipolar disorder. That's part of borderline personality disorder. Right. So it's looking at what are the helpful approaches for helping with that particular issue, because there's lots of related issues that could fall under many different diagnoses. Kristen?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't feel like it is here's this diagnosis and it ends, and then this diagnosis picks up and it ends. I was once told, and mind you, diagnosis can be transient depending on who you're going to see. They will not just accept the diagnosis that's sent to them from a previous clinician. Even you'll have psychiatrists and therapists disagree about what's the more primary. And therapists, at least in the social work world, I don't know what you are, Dana, we're taught to follow the client and what's going on with the client, not we have a recipe for this diagnosis. So what I was told when my daughter at one point was saying, oh, well, she's bipolar, even though she's young. And, we really can't say she's bipolar. Her ADHD, they couldn't treat with meds because it was basically considered a symptom of her bipolar issues. And to address that, it was like a double-edged sword. Would addressing those specific ADHD issues actually help assuage some of the bipolar tendencies that come out? Or do we need to address more of the emotional meltdowns and things like that? So it's like Eric said, you've got to really just flow into what is impacting you most negatively, or even too excitedly. Sometimes it can be too much of the good emotion, since you're talking about the bipolar piece, or too much rejection, or too much acceptance and attachment. So I think that is a really good guide to think about, is what is affecting you the most at the moment.
Right.
I was going to chime in on what Kristen said about how these diagnoses are not separate. They tend to blur and overlap, and they kind of feed each other. And I can speak to this from my own experience. I have ADHD, but a big part of my ADHD experience, my journey, was realizing that I also had some trauma-based responses going on from my family of origin issues, and that I was just not paying attention to at all. But they manifest a lot of same way as ADHD in a lot of ways, as in, tuning out, indecisiveness, decision paralysis, which are some of the things I actually came to ADHD reWired coaching to work on, and realized, oh, I have more than one problem. So they overlap, and they can feed each other and interact. And figuring that out, I'm still trying to figure it out, but I want to concur with you that they are related. And I would say the first step is just to get more information, more observation, to learn your traits as well as you can, and just observe. And then once you have that awareness, that will help. If you aware of that and you keep working at it, I believe, just from a spiritual sense, that the answer is the awareness of like which is how they interact with each other will eventually become more clear to you. And that's from a personal standpoint, observing your own behavior patterns. If it's someone else, it might be a little bit more difficult, but I'd say take the same approach. Just observe and learn the traits that are being exhibited as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Brian. Laura?
So I've got two things here. I want to elaborate on what Brian said, because that's so incredibly important. I have heard recently, particularly at CHAD, that ADHD has been said to cause different degrees of CPTSD simply from our experience of growing up, dealing with negative comments, extreme feelings of shame, and CPTSD can present as symptoms of ADHD. And I have actually heard one psychiatrist who I visited say that they didn't feel comfortable diagnosing ADHD when there was such a large component of CPTSD in the mix, because they looked so similar.
And just in case people don't know, PTSD is complex PTSD. So it's like it's like growing up undiagnosed ADHD. Like, it's pretty real.
Yeah. And there's some really interesting work happening right now with looking at EMDR for ADHD and the trauma responses that we have had with our experience growing up. I want to also say, I can't address this from a professional perspective, but on the topic of bipolar and ADHD, I highly recommend an episode of ADHD reWired, which is episode 118. It's called Could It Be Bipolar Disorder with Dr. Roberto Olivardia. And I love this episode. I don't re-listen to podcasts. I listened to this one again. It was so good.
Mm.
It's phenomenal. And yeah, I can't recommend it enough.
Cool. Dana?
Along with what Kristen said, absolutely a person-centered approach. ADHD is complex and unique, and we are all complex and unique human beings. And everything about us is different. And within each diagnosis, that also might be different. And so what are you looking for in the diagnosis? Is it a community? Is it identity? Is it tools and strategies? Is it approaches? Have you experimented with different approaches? In what way have you experimented? Different therapists, different treatment plans, a team approach. There's just so much there. And I think just going back to what works for you, is it important to identify as this? If so, great, identify. find that community like Erica has created here with ADHD. It's really about, like Eric said before, the approaches and the tools and the strategies that you use. What is at the forefront? What are you most struggling with? Or what is your biggest challenge? And go from there.
Thanks, Dana. All right, we for the podcast, we're going to take one more quick break. And then when we come back, we'll try to answer a couple more questions here. So we will be right back. Hey, if you are listening to this early enough on the day it came out, then you can join me and the rest of our ADHD reWired team and friends for our monthly live Q&A. That's today or every second Tuesday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Go to ADHDrewired.com/events to register or check out the link in the show notes. And now, for what might be your new favorite part of this show, a product of fiction. Here we go. How often do you feel like you are the only one with ADHD at the places you work, live, or play? Now you can take off the mask and find others just like you. It's ADHD-DAR. That's right, folks. The world's first social navigation device that can detect ADHD from a distance. With ADHD-DAR, no longer will you find yourself stuck in a conversation about the history of tax codes, paint swatches, or other mind-numbing, boring conversation. If you like tax code and paint swatches, so that's your thing, then you're good. No worries. This will also work for you. With ADHD-DAR in your pocket, your device will beep, blink, or gently vibrate whenever it detects somebody else with ADHD within a 20-foot radius. And hey, ADHD-DAR isn't just for finding new friends or avoiding boring chit-chat, but it will also send you a notification if you happen to be surrounded by 100% normies. Sometimes it's just good to know. But remember, this is not a medical device or even a real device. But what is real is the power of connection and community. If you're looking for ways to connect with other like-brained ADHDers, then point your ADHD-DAR to the World Wide Web and go to ADHDrewired.com. There, you can learn more about our flagship program, our intensive coaching and accountability groups, or co-work with us with our affordable adult study hall membership community for both directed and self-directed co-working. Because at ADHD Rewired, we believe a wandering mind is also a wonderful mind. Thanks for listening. All right, we are back. What is our next question?
Okay, we have a question from Aubrey, and it says, Eric, you are coming up on 500 podcast episodes. I'm so impressed by the consistency that this accomplishment takes. 1, what is your secret sauce to hitting this major milestone achievement? And 2, what advice would you give to someone who likes the idea of podcasting, but is terrified of not being able to do it consistently?
Ooh, okay. So what is the secret sauce? I remember when I was first learning podcasting, I joined a podcasting membership community. One of the things I heard is that, most podcasters won't even make it past episode 15. Those that do, most of them aren't going to make it past 25. And then my brain goes, oh yeah? So it was kind of my inner oppositional kind of like, I'll show you. The other piece is I love the medium. Like if I did not love the medium of podcasting, there is no way in hell I would be doing this as consistently as I've done for 9.5 years now. If I would have started with this idea of I want to do 500 episodes, I would have never started. What I did is I focused on doing one episode and then another and then another. And then when I was, getting close to like 50, I was like, all right, let me just get to 50. And then I continued that. And then when I started getting like closer to 100, I'm like, all right, I'm going to get to 100. And then it kind of just became routine in a good way, not in the boring way. I've allowed myself to experiment. I've allowed myself to play with different sort of formats. Because this didn't even start as an interview show, right? This was just, me sharing tips and some strategies, right? And then I sort of stumbled into my first interview and I was like, oh, I like this a lot better. So it's really finding what works for you, finding your own voice and having fun with it. That's kind of been the secret sauce. And, The one thing that I wish I was better at doing was creating shorter content. Cause I look at my analytics and most people probably aren't even hearing this right now because they've already stopped listening. Um, but you're here, so kudos to you. Loving what you do and finding kind of what motivates you and trying to also make it as easy as possible, creating the systems around it. Like I have no patience for back and forth scheduling with like email and stuff like that. Like I have a whole system. I use one of those scheduling tools. And yeah, I'm trying to think what else. What was
Someone asked a follow up saying, "What is it about the medium you love?" And I was trying to find the answer in what you were saying, and I'm not sure I found it.
Okay.
Because you can do interviews on lots of different mediums. So, what is it specific to podcast platform that you like that keeps you coming back?
With video, we expect video to be short form, right? Where I like the long form content. I like to have a deep conversation. I like to, I'm a very curious person and I let my curiosity guide me in the conversation, right? It's like it's just, I think be authentic, be yourself, have fun with it. And I would also encourage you to seek out a lot of feedback in the beginning as you're going through it from your audience, from people and workshop it. I think that's also a really important piece because, especially over the last year or so, the number of new ADHD-based podcasts have like exploded. But there's still room for good content. There's always room for good content. Even if you have an idea that's similar to what somebody else is doing, nobody's going to do it like you are. So like, don't lose sight of that idea too. Because, people say, oh, somebody's already doing that. My response to that is great. Proof of concept. Like it'll work. Right. So I hope that's helpful for you. All right. Let's go to another question. We got Jessica. Hi, Jessica.
Oh my goodness. Hi. Yeah. So I had posted a comment like a half an hour ago and I was all feeling the RSD because nobody was answering. And then I realized that it wasn't actually a question, which kind of, led me to the follow-up, especially when I'm anxious, which is more often than not. I do have a really hard time articulating what it is that I need, especially at work. So any feedback on how to navigate all of that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. And thank you for your courage to come on here and actually ask your question. I love that.
Thanks.
Oh man, the issue of getting sort of tongue-tied and not be able to express what's in your head in a way that makes sense to others. Man, I wish we can just create that device that people can just understand our thoughts without us having to speak them. That would be really, really helpful. So the first thing that kind of came to mind that I have learned personally is actually a trauma response. And when your brain kind of goes blank and you can't get any of the words out, that's apparently a common trauma response. So, as we've talked here, even on just today's Q&A here, trauma is a big part of the ADHD picture. And I think it's probably more the exception than the rule that someone living with ADHD, especially if they were later diagnosed ADHD, if they somehow made it to where they are right now without trauma, it's a fucking miracle. I mean, honestly, I just started doing EMDR for the first time a couple weeks ago because I've done a lot of therapy. And I personally felt like there's core areas that traditional talk therapy has not touched. Right. So, and this was one of the things where my brain just kind of goes it's not often where my brain is quiet. Right. But if I'm triggered by something, it goes quiet. And it's frustrating because it's like, I just had all these thoughts. I'm not sure where they just went. So is that kind of what you're experiencing?
Very much. I'm a social worker, so
you and me both, Jessica.
Yay, social worker. Also, I had 2 master's degrees before I was diagnosed at 41. So 8 years later, still kind of trying to navigate how all of it works. And the piece that I had mentioned in my not question earlier was just trying to figure out how to explain that something might work perfectly for me one day and I might be completely paralyzed and not be able to do that. And because there is zero understanding by anybody in a supervisory position, they either don't believe me, or they think that I'm just not living up to my potential, or I'm being lazy, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard.
I think you just listed 3 very highly triggering pieces of feedback that we get from people who don't get it. If there's one thing that's consistent about our ADHD is that it is inconsistent, right? Like that's the constant. Let me see what Kristen has to say.
All right. Hi, Jessica. So like when I've been called to a kid who is having an emotional meltdown, I can't start with, well, what's the logical thing you could do to get your needs met or to communicate what you need? It's that same idea. When our anxiety kicks in, the amygdala goes in full. I just did a training on this the other day, and it was so cool. The information goes through the eyes. It hits the amygdala before it gets to the cortex. So the cortex is where your executive function is, the way you form sentences and words and communicate your thoughts. So the amygdala has already gone, rah, and gone into protection mode. So it makes sense. You got anxious because the moment started coming, you started sensing it, and then you started trying to find words to respond, and it got more anxious because of that. My hope is that you could work on some mindfulness meditations to begin calming that mind down more often so the amygdala doesn't get all riled up too quickly. Because I also have this experience where it'll rile up, and I've made it worse by worrying about that in the moment, when come to find out it wasn't going to be a situation.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So working on calming that down could help. And I think what you need to know, though, in the meantime, what do I do about that, right? To Kristen. So I really lean into having pretty general responses ready to go for especially kind of repeated situations. Something that works, you may have to practice them. You have to practice them on other people, and maybe feel like you're being an advocate for someone else in the moment as you're trying to create these kind of scripts that you can latch onto to help you in that moment. Basically say, okay, I need to go process this. And it's better if I write my thoughts out on what I need. So can I send you an email? That's an idea. Something like that.
Good one. I like that.
Dana?
Yes, Jessica. So yes, as a social worker and behavioral health specialist and all the things for almost 15 years, right? There's a lot of intense emotion in our jobs, right? And we are also highly sensitive people. And so our reaction to other people's reaction and situations and experiences is intense. I'm wondering, like, if you have kind of a body practice or a breathing practice that you can kind of tune into what's happening right now in my body, right? What does this feel like? Is my heart racing? Are my palms sweating? Does my stomach feel like it has butterflies in it? So identifying and dropping down into the body, maybe using some breath work of inhale for 4, exhale for 8, right? Slow the heart rate down. Take time, pause, right? You don't have to answer. You don't have to have all the answers. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I know I struggle with this all the time, is trying to get my ideas and emotions and thoughts out. But if I just take some time, center myself, use my body to know myself, use my breath, it's extremely helpful. And another thing also is like the whole body approach, right? Like, what are you doing for self-care? Is your sleep okay? Is your eating habits okay? Are you hydrated? Are you exercising? General whole body, whole person approach to this, because we, again, are complex beings and we need a lot, and we experience, a lot of emotion. And so, keep up the good fight, Jessica.
Thank you so much.
And kudos, Jessica, for coming on through the anxiety to ask your question. I think you did a great job asking that question.
Thanks.
All right. I think that time is no longer on our side, that we got to wrap this one up. So I want to thank everyone for asking questions. I want to thank Dana and Kristen and Laura and Brian and Lisa for being a part of this. And I want to thank you as a listener for doing your part and trying to make your life a little bit better here. Because, we absolutely can thrive with ADHD. And it's not about just trying harder, right? It's about trying different. So if what you did today was something different, kudos to you. We will catch you back here next month. We do this every second Tuesday of the month at the same time. I want to thank everyone, and we'll catch you next time. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD Rewired podcast network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD Rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you are a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all of the shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and the Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tippers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.